In 40 years on the Chicago PD, I made one mistake. Not the kind where you shoot the wrong man or follow the wrong lead down an alley that ends in water. The quieter kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already finished with you. The Remington case. People ask me sometimes, colleagues, mostly prior, on the nights when we're both tired enough to be honest, whether I was fooled. I tell them no, and I mean it. Being fooled implies something happened to you by surprise. A banana peel. A dark room. This was different. Daniel Remington didn't catch me off guard. He studied me. 40 years of case files, testimony records, newspaper column inches about the detective who never broke a case he truly believed in. He read all of it. Then he picked up the phone. He didn't fool me. He chose me. Specifically, surgically. The way a jeweler chooses the right tool for the right stone. He needed someone honest enough to believe him. Good enough to fight for him. Blind enough not to see him. I was all three. 3 weeks earlier, I was just a man who needed the work.
November 14th, 1949. Victor has been dead 3 days. I've cried when it was appropriate and sat quietly when silence seemed more convincing. Tonight I am neither grieving nor celebrating. I am planning. This diary is not confession. I want to be clear about that. Even here, even alone. It is architecture. I have spent 8 years building something careful and invisible, and now, because Victor couldn't leave well enough alone, I must build something new on top of the rubble of the old. I need a detective, not a clever one. Clever detectives follow instinct, and instinct is dangerous. I need an honest one. An honest detective finds what is there, what I leave for him to find. I've been reading about a man named Mahoney, Jack Mahoney, CPD, 40 years. Closed cases like a man folding laundry, methodical, complete, nothing left on the floor. His reputation is the kind you can't manufacture. That's exactly what makes it useful. Tomorrow I call him. Tomorrow I become the man who needs saving. I've been practicing the voice. I almost believe it myself. That's important. I've always been good at belief.
The call came at 7 in the morning. I was already up. Eleanor was at her sister's by then. Had been since the Corral business in 47, and the apartment had that particular silence that isn't peaceful, just empty. I'd made coffee and was standing at the window watching the lake try to decide whether it was gray or green when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was educated, soft around the consonants, the way old money gets when it learns to apologize for itself. He said his name was Daniel Remington. Said his brother Victor had been found 3 days ago in the study of their estate on Lakeshore Drive. Single gunshot, close range. Said the police had him as their primary suspect. Said he was to be formally arrested tomorrow morning unless something changed tonight. His voice broke on the word tomorrow. Went thin and ragged at the edges. I've heard a lot of broken voices in 40 years. Some of them meant something. He said, "Mr. Mahoney, you're the only one who'll believe me. Everyone else has already decided." He didn't ask. He just said it, like a man who'd run out of doors and found one still unlocked. I told him I'd come.
November 15th, 1949. Mahoney said yes. I knew he would, of course. Men like Mahoney are constitutionally incapable of turning away from what presents itself as innocent suffering. I said the right things in the right order, and his pause before answering was not the pause of a suspicious man. It was the pause of a tired one calculating whether he had enough left to give. He has enough. That's what the files told me. He always has enough. I've been thinking about the difference between a corrupt detective and an honest one, in terms of practical utility. A corrupt detective would find the truth inside a week. He'd follow money and motive and eventually arrive at something true because his moral compass is already broken and he doesn't flinch at ugly conclusions. An honest detective follows what he finds and believes what he builds and becomes, in time, the architecture of your innocence. He doesn't find the truth. He finds the story. And I have built a very good story. Mahoney is coming tomorrow. I've been through the study twice more. The scratches on the window latch look authentic. The absence of certain documents looks like oversight, not removal. A good man will find exactly what I left. That's exactly why I chose him.
The Remington estate sat 3 floors tall behind a wrought iron gate on Lakeshore Drive. the kind of house that remembers when the city was younger and more willing to forgive wealth for existing. I came in the morning. Daniel met me at the door. He was younger than his voice, maybe 35, and he had the look of a man who'd been crying in short, controlled bursts, the way people do when they can't afford to lose themselves completely. His suit was expensive but slept in. There were shadows under his eyes that had been there long before Victor died. We walked through Victor's study together. The body had been removed 3 days ago, but the room still held the particular stillness of a place that has recently contained violence. I stood at the window. I looked at the desk. I looked at the floor. Victor had been a precise man. The arrangement of what remained told me that. Books aligned, papers stacked. Someone had come into that precision and ended it. Daniel stood in the doorway, and I watched him watch the room. His face did something I've only seen real grief do. It couldn't decide where to land. His eyes moved from the desk to the chair to the floor and couldn't settle. A guilty man prepares his expression. His had no preparation in it. I remember thinking, this man didn't do it.
November 16, 1949. Mahoney walked through Victor's study for 41 minutes. I timed it. I sat in the front sitting room with cold tea and listened to his footsteps above me, methodical, slow, doubling back, the sound of a man constructing something in his head. 41 minutes. He found the scratches on the window latch in the first 10. I know because I heard him stop moving. A small pause, then the sound of him crouching. Good. The scratches took me 3 hours to get right. Not too obvious. Obvious things make honest men suspicious. Just present enough that a careful eye finds them and feels the quiet satisfaction of discovery. That satisfaction matters. It makes a man trust his own conclusion. When Mahoney came downstairs, his expression was composed and professional, but I caught the small tightening around his eyes that means a detective has a thread. He asked about the latch's condition before the murder. I told him the household had reported it stiff for weeks. He wrote something in his notebook. He thinks someone broke in, right on schedule. He's very good at his work. That's the tragedy of it in a way. A lesser detective would have stopped looking. Mahoney will keep looking and find everything I've prepared for him. Every breadcrumb exactly where I left it.
I spent the afternoon with the household staff. The Remington estate ran on 4 people, a cook, a groundskeeper named Halloran, a housekeeper called Mrs. Adler, and a young man who drove and did what else needed doing. Halloran was the most useful, solid man. Worked the grounds 11 years, knew every car on the drive by sound. He said he'd seen an unfamiliar automobile parked half a block south on the night of the murder. Dark sedan, Illinois plates, but the number lost in the dark. Couldn't describe the driver, just the car, idling then gone. Mrs. Adler was something else entirely. She was nervous in a way that didn't read as simple grief. She folded and unfolded her hands when I asked about the days before Victor died. Wouldn't meet my eyes when I asked about the family dynamics. I noted it, attributed it to the particular anxiety of domestic staff when police are present in the home. A reasonable assumption. I didn't push her. I made a note to come back to her. What I didn't notice, and I've thought about this since many times, was Margaret Remington. She was standing in the hallway at the top of the stairs the entire time I interviewed the staff. Watching me, I saw her peripherally. I thought, grieving sister. I moved on.
November 16th, 1949, late. Margaret came to my room at 10:30. She didn't knock the way she usually does, that light 3-tap sequence she's used since we were children. She just opened the door and stood there with her arms crossed, and her face doing the thing it does when she's decided to be brave. She said, "I know what you're doing, Daniel." I told her she was hysterical, that grief made people see patterns that weren't there, that she needed rest. She said, "Mahoney is a good man. Don't use him like this." I said, "I'm not using anyone. I'm protecting what's left of this family." She said, "Victor was protecting this family. He was going to the police on Thursday." I said, "And look what happened to him." I didn't mean it as a threat. I don't think I meant it as a threat. She left without speaking again. Margaret has always known. From the beginning, I think. Some animal sense sisters develop about brothers who are drowning, but she can't say it directly. She never could. She loves me in a way that defeats her. I've counted on that. God forgive me, I've counted on that from the start.
Margaret Remington was 26 years old, and she had the kind of stillness that either comes from great calm or great damage. Hard to tell which at first. She asked me to walk with her in the garden the second morning. It was cold. The lake wind came off the drive and moved through the bare trees at the estate's edge in a way that sounded almost conversational. She said, "Mr. Mahoney, I want to ask you something, and I need you to think about it carefully." I said that was what I was paid for. She said, "Are you sure you're asking the right questions? Are you sure you understand who hired you and why?" I told her I was asking every question the case required. She stopped walking. She looked at me directly, not the way most people look at a detective, which is either too eager or too careful. She looked at me the way you look at something you're trying to memorize, like she was recording me for later. She said, "You seem like a man who believes people." I took that as a compliment. I said I'd found it useful over the years. She opened her mouth and then closed it. Whatever she decided to say, she decided against it. She just nodded once, slowly, and said, "Please be careful." I thought she meant physically. I thought she was worried about dangerous men. I was wrong about almost everything she said to me.
November 17th, 1949. Mahoney spoke with Margaret in the garden this morning. I watched from the upstairs window. I couldn't hear them, but I watched the shape of it, her posture, her hands, his stillness. Margaret tried to tell him. I could see it in the way she reached for something, twice, and pulled back, the restraint in her shoulders. She's always been braver in theory than in practice, my sister. She would need to say, "My brother killed Victor for the inheritance and the 8 years of embezzlement Victor discovered." She would need to say that sentence out loud to a man she'd met once about her surviving brother, while still in the house where the other brother's blood was barely cold. She couldn't. I've known Margaret my whole life. I knew she couldn't. I told her she couldn't without saying so. I built this plan around her silence the way an architect builds around a load-bearing wall, working with the structure, not against it. Mahoney came back inside with the expression of a man who has been told to be careful without being told why, and who has filed the instruction under general concern and moved on. He really is perfect for this. I would almost admire him if admiration didn't require distance I can't afford.
Halloran's description of the dark sedan took 2 days to work into something useful. I pulled records, talked to a traffic officer who worked the drive, called in a favor from a man I knew at the DMV. The car belonged to a company registered to one Gerald Stills. I ran Stills through the department. He had a record, 2 counts of assault, 1 dismissed extortion charge, and he'd been working as a debt collector for a firm out of Cicero for the past 6 years. Victor Remington had borrowed heavily against 2 commercial properties. The debt was Stills's account. I brought this to Daniel the same evening. He was sitting in the front parlor with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched and a fire that was dying for want of attention. When I laid it out, Stills, the debt, the car on the drive, no alibi for the night in question, his face did something complicated. Relief first, then something that looked like he was trying to hold the relief back out of decency. His hands went to his face. His shoulders shook once, hard, like a man who has been bracing against something for days and just felt it shift. He said, "I knew it wasn't me. I knew someone would believe that." I sat down across from him. I believed him completely. The thought didn't even arrive as a thought. It arrived as fact.
November 18th, 1949. Mahoney found Stills. Of course he did. I've been working toward Stills for 3 months. The debt was real. Victor really did owe Stills money, borrowed against the Wacker Street properties at terrible terms when the business first started slipping. I didn't create that debt. I just made sure Victor's payment records were in a drawer that was easy to find and a drawer that Mahoney would think to look in. I made sure Halloran saw the car. I parked it there myself, 3 blocks north of where Halloran stood, moved it twice, let the engine idle long enough to be remembered. Stills doesn't know any of this. He's an innocent man in the specific sense that he didn't kill Victor. He's not innocent in the broader sense. He's done violence for money in the past and will again. He exists in that useful gray zone where blame feels almost reasonable, almost earned. I know what I'm doing to him. I don't let myself not know. That's the only honesty I have left, and I'm keeping it. I almost feel sorry for him. Almost is doing a great deal of work in that sentence. I'm aware of that. Some nights it keeps me up. Other nights it doesn't. Tonight I slept fine.
I was thorough. Being thorough has always been the thing that kept me honest, which means it's also the thing that eventually showed me how wrong I'd been. Before I pursued Stills any further, I went into Daniel's finances. Standard work. Ugly work sometimes, but necessary. You can't advocate for a client without understanding the shape of their motive. Daniel's finances were a disaster of the sincere and explicable kind. Their mother, Anna Remington, 63, in a care facility on the North Shore, required substantial monthly payments. Daniel had borrowed against everything he had to cover them after his import business collapsed in '46. The collapse was documented, credible. The war's end had reshuffled the import market, and Daniel had bet on the wrong goods at the wrong moment. There was nothing suspicious in the failure. It looked exactly like what it was, a man making reasonable decisions in an unreasonable market and losing. I sat with all of this for an afternoon. I thought, here's a man who had every possible reason to want Victor dead. The inheritance would cover every debt twice. Then I thought the thing that undid me. I thought, but would a man this desperate, this openly ruined, be this honest about the extent of his desperation? A calculating killer hides his motive. Daniel had laid his out like a confession. I believed him more than ever.
November 19th, 1949. Mother called today. She sounds better than last month. The new facility has better staff, and she's sleeping more. She asked about Victor. I told her what I've told her before, that the police are investigating, that it was a robbery gone wrong, that Victor would want her to focus on her health. She accepted this. She's always accepted what I tell her. In some ways, that's where it all began, I think. Victor was the responsible one, the one who sat across from accountants and talked seriously about the future. I was the one who sat with Mother and made her laugh and kept the fear away from her. Victor handled numbers. I handled hearts. And when the numbers started going wrong, slowly, over years, the kind of slow that only shows under long examination, I told myself, this is temporary. I'll replace it before anyone notices. I'll make it right before it matters. I told myself that for 8 years. Victor finally examined the long view and saw everything I'd done. He called it theft. I called it survival. He gave me 3 days to confess before he went to the police. I gave him 1 evening. I almost told Mother the truth today. The word almost is very important. I did not tell her. I never will.
Margaret found me in the front hall late on the 4th day as I was leaving. She was coming down the stairs with the particular pace of someone who has been waiting for the right moment and decided this one would have to do. She was holding a small notebook, black cover, the kind businessmen use for daily notes. She pressed it into my hands with both of hers and held them there a moment, the way you hold something closed that might fall open. She said, "Victor kept this. I found it in the interior pocket of his jacket, the one he was wearing." I asked her why she hadn't given it to the police. She said, "I wanted you to have it first." She said it very carefully, as though the precision of it mattered. Then she held both my hands around the notebook for just a moment longer than made sense and said, "Please look at everything, Mr. Mahoney. Everything. Don't decide you've seen enough before you finished." I told her I never did. She looked at me with those recording eyes of hers and said, "No, I don't suppose you think you do." I walked out to my car holding the notebook. I thought she was in pain and reaching for meaning. I thought the emphasis was grief's grammar. I thought Margaret is struggling. That's what I thought.
November 20th, 1949. Margaret gave him the notebook. I didn't expect that. I sat with this fact for several hours this evening, and I still don't know whether to be impressed or frightened. The notebook was Victor's daily business ledger, routine entries, meeting notes, the fabric of his professional life. But there are also entries about me. Victor was thorough. He'd been building his own record for months, quietly, the way he did everything, patiently, invisibly, until it was complete. The last 3 pages of that notebook contained something specific, something precise. I treated them 7 weeks ago with a compound a chemist friend described in a letter I have since burned. Under normal light, the pages look water-damaged, the ink dissolved to gray suggestion, the words are simply absent, but under ultraviolet exposure the ink is perfectly clear. Every word, everything Victor knew and wrote down. I need to know what Mahoney does with those pages. If he takes the notebook somewhere sophisticated, a proper laboratory, anyone with specialized equipment, the entry ends there. The next line begins a new topic without resolution, as though he decided not to finish the thought, as though finishing it was too close to something he didn't want to name.
The notebook was useful, mostly. Victor Remington kept meticulous records of his business dealings, and the picture that emerged was of a man who had accumulated several dangerous creditors over the past 4 years. Stills featured prominently 2 loans, a refinancing, increasingly aggressive collection notes in Victor's careful handwriting. There were also 2 men Victor appeared to have been extorting. Not clearly, the language was oblique and plausibly deniable, but the shape of it was legible enough. Either of them would have motive. Either of them could have sent Stills or come themselves. The notebook gave Mahoney a better picture of Victor's world. The last 3 pages were another matter. They appeared water-damaged. The ink washed thin, the writing dissolved to the faintest gray suggestion of language. I held them to the window. I held them under my desk lamp. I could almost convince myself I saw numbers, but almost isn't evidence. I noted the damage. I moved on to what I could use. I didn't pursue the pages further. I was 48 hours from what I believed was the solution, and I had everything I needed. I thought I was being thorough. I was standing directly above the truth in the dark with both hands out, touching nothing.
November 21st, 1949. He didn't use a lamp. I mean that precisely. An ultraviolet lamp. I know because I have a source in Mahoney's building, a clerk who owes me money and has no idea why I'm asking, who confirmed that Mahoney checked nothing into the crime lab on the day he examined the notebook. He worked in his own office. Desk lamp, window light, the standard tools of a standard examination. The treatment I applied to those final pages was not designed to defeat a forensic laboratory. It wasn't designed to defeat any sophisticated analysis at all. It was designed to defeat a tired, brilliant, honest detective who believes he is already looking at the whole picture, because the whole picture, by the time he reached those 3 pages, already had a shape. Stills, the debt, the dark car on the drive, the window latch scratches. When a man has constructed a convincing answer, 3 damaged pages become corroboration of messiness rather than evidence of anything specific. He doesn't have a UV lamp because why would he? He thinks he has found his killer, and honest Mahoney trusts what he's built. That is his greatest quality, and tonight it is also the most useful thing about him. I slept very well.
Stills was arrested on a Wednesday. The evidence was circumstantial in the way that most real evidence is. No single piece conclusive, but the accumulation sufficient. The car on the drive, the debt in its collection, his record. No alibi that held under examination. The DA liked it enough. My name went on the official report as the investigator who'd assembled the case. I told myself I'd done the work correctly, that Stills had motive, means, and opportunity, and the absence of an alibi that should have been easy to produce if it existed. I told myself these things as statements of fact because they were statements of fact. I went to the estate that evening to inform Daniel. He was in the garden despite the cold, wearing no coat, as though he'd been standing there waiting for something to arrive. When I told him, he turned and took both my hands in his. His hands were cold. Mine were unsteady in the way they get when I'm tired and I haven't eaten enough, the way they've been since the Corral business, the shaking I don't speak of to anyone. He held them anyway. He said, "You saved my life, Mr. Mahoney. I'll never forget this, not for as long as I live." His eyes were wet. I drove home feeling like a man who had done what he was put on earth to do.
November 23rd, 1949. Done. It is, I think, actually done. Stills has been charged and remanded. The DA's office released a statement this afternoon that I read 3 times. My name is absent. Daniel Remington. Cleared, grieving, vindicated. By tomorrow, I'll begin the process of notifying the estate lawyers. The inheritance probate will take 30 to 60 days. I've already spoken with an accountant in New York who will help restructure the family holdings into something manageable, something that doesn't carry the weight of what I did to it over 8 years. A clean start. I think about Stills sometimes. He wasn't innocent, not truly, not in the long accounting of his life. He did violence for money. He threatened people. He made their lives smaller through fear. I know this doesn't make what's happening to him just... I'm not arguing justice. I'm arguing proximity to justice, which is the best I can do from where I'm standing. Everyone in this story got something they didn't deserve, including Victor, who deserved to live. I know that. I hold that. I got exactly what I was trying to get, which might be the only honest thing I can say. And Mahoney went home feeling like a good man. I hope he stays that way.
I should have slept. 3 days after Stills's arrest, I should have slept the way you sleep when a case closes clean, and you've earned it. I've slept like that before. Not this time. There was something small and persistent in the architecture of it. Not a specific thing, not an identifiable flaw. Just the way a room feels when furniture has been moved back and almost replaced correctly. Everything appears right, but something has been recently rearranged. I drove. I do that sometimes when the apartment gets too quiet and thinking gets too circular. I take the car out and let the city work on whatever's stuck. 3 in the morning, I found myself on Lakeshore Drive without deciding to be there. The Remington estate sat dark and proper behind its gate, every window dark. Then one wasn't. Daniel's study, 3rd floor, amber light, steady, someone working or sitting at a desk. I slowed at the gate. I sat there for perhaps a minute with the engine idling. A man awake at 3 in the morning after 3 days of resolution. Lots of reasons for that. Grief, relief, the particular insomnia of trauma, all of them reasonable. I told myself all of them and drove on. I went home. I stared at my ceiling, and eventually the ceiling became morning, and morning became the next day, and I thought about those 3 pages I hadn't been able to read.
November 26th, 1949. I saw headlights slow at the gate tonight, then move on. It was after 2 in the morning, and I was working through the estate inventory documents that the lawyers require. A tedious and strangely melancholy process, cataloging what Victor owned and what now belongs to the estate and what the estate will eventually render to me. Numbers and column inches, the kind of work Victor was good at. I'm less good at it, which is part of how I'm here at all. I was at the desk when the light slowed, and I had a moment, brief, clinical, of something that was not quite fear, but was fear's immediate neighbor. Then the lights moved on. I went to the window. A car heading north on the drive, nothing to identify it. Could have been anyone, likely was anyone. Chicago is a city of insomniacs, but I thought, Mahoney, good man, bad timing. And then I thought, no, it's done. He found what I left. He built what I needed. He closed his case. Go home, detective. Tend to your apartment and your absent wife and your 40 years of service. You did your job. You did it well. Nobody would argue otherwise, least of all me. I went back to the inventory. By morning, it was nearly complete.
I went back to the notebook on the 5th morning after the arrest. I don't know what made me do it. I have no clean explanation for the instinct that isn't available to me in retrospect, because what happened next makes me want to claim I always knew. I didn't always know, but something made me go back. I sat at my desk with the notebook open to the last 3 pages. I'd looked at them before under the desk lamp. This time I did something different without being entirely sure why. I carried the notebook to the window and held the pages at an angle to the morning light. Low November light, coming in gray and flat at about 7 degrees from horizontal, the kind of light that catches texture rather than penetrating it. And I could see, not clearly, not usably, but I could see something in the surface of the treated pages. The paper had a faint topographical quality, as though the ink had changed the surface slightly rather than simply resting on it. Numbers, I thought, not Stills's name, numbers, lots of them, arranged in a way that looked like column accounting. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called a man I knew at the crime lab. A friend, technically. I told him I had a document question. He said, come in the morning.
November 28th, 1949. I leave for New York next Thursday. The estate sale listing goes up in 30 days. I've arranged everything at the care facility for Mother. Prepaid for 14 months, enough time for the estate to close and the funds to transfer. The administrator there is a serious woman named Kowalski, who has known Mother 3 years and genuinely likes her, which matters more than it perhaps should to me. I've made sure Mother will be comfortable. Whatever else is true of me, and I know what is true of me, I don't use soft language with myself in private. I took care of her. Victor took care of numbers. I took care of her. I'll let history argue the relative merits. I spent the afternoon in Victor's study for what I believe is the last time. I left the window open as I've done every day since November 13th. Cold air off the lake, that particular smell of November water and old city. The room is becoming neutral. The character of a man takes time to leave a space. Some rooms hold their people for years. Victor's study is losing him slowly. November by November, open window by open window. By spring it'll be gone entirely. Someone else will arrange their things in his careful room and not know what happened there. That's the way of rooms. And of most things.
The crime lab used an ultraviolet lamp, standard equipment. My friend held it over the last 3 pages of Victor Remington's notebook, and the pages came alive as though they'd been waiting. Victor's handwriting, the precise, closely spaced hand I'd come to recognize through the entire notebook, filled those pages with absolute clarity. Dates going back 8 years, account numbers, transfer amounts. The business accounts of Remington Brothers Import, matched against personal accounts at 2 banks. Money moved out of the business in increments calibrated to stay beneath the threshold of formal audit review, sometimes weekly, sometimes twice monthly, never the same amount twice in succession. Patient, systematic, skilled. Victor had cataloged every transaction. He had noted the date he discovered it, October 28th. He had noted the date he confronted the person responsible, November 10th. He had written the name clearly at the top of the first page, the way a careful man marks every document he intends to present as evidence. Daniel Remington. Victor had given his brother 3 days. November 13th, Victor Remington was shot once at close range in his own study. My hand shook in a way that had nothing to do with stress. I thanked my friend. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about 40 years.
November 29th, 1949. I find myself thinking about what people will say when this comes out someday. Not if, when. I'm a realist about these things. Somewhere in the accounting of time, some clever person will look at some overlooked thing and the shape of it will become clear. I've made peace with that. What I've made peace with, specifically, is the gap between their understanding and my experience. They will say, he killed his brother for money and let an innocent man take the charge. That's true. It's a true sentence. But it is not the complete story, and it never will be to anyone reading it from the outside. They didn't live my life. They didn't watch Mother decline by increments that cost more each month than I earned in 2. They didn't watch Victor review the accounts quarterly and feel the specific terror of a man watching a clock count down toward a verdict. They didn't sit across from Victor on November 10th and hear him say, "You have 3 days, Daniel, and after that I go to the police and I go to Mother and I am finished protecting you." He didn't say that gently. He said it correctly. He wasn't wrong. That's the part nobody will understand. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't give me a choice I could survive.
I drove back to the estate from the crime lab. I don't know why. The case was already closed. Daniel's name was on no official charge. Stills was in holding. There was nothing at the estate that would change in the next hour based on my driving past it. I went anyway. I parked across the street and looked at it for a long time. I went through everything in sequence. First visit, the study, the scratches I'd found on the window latch with a feeling of discovery that I now understood differently. The particular satisfaction of finding what someone wants you to find, designed to feel like earned detection. Mrs. Adler, nervous, not meeting my eyes. not the anxiety of domestic staff around police. She knew something. Daniel's grief, which I had read as genuine because I had been reading grief for 40 years and was good at it. He was also good at it, better than good. The debt, the finances, the open desperation, all real, all displayed, all weaponized. And Margaret pressing the notebook into my hands, Margaret holding them closed around it for one extra moment, Margaret saying, "Please look at everything, everything," and me hearing grief and hearing caution and hearing a woman worried about her brother's safety. I had missed every signal she sent, every single one, and she had run out of signals she could send.
December 1st, 1949. Final entry before New York. I've been thinking about Mahoney. The Mahoney Files. That's what the newspapers called his career in that profile piece from 46. 40 years clean. Not a case he believed in that he didn't close right. Not an innocent man he fought for who ended in a cell. His reputation is the longest-running argument for human decency I've encountered. I read that profile twice before I called him. I read his closed case summaries. I read the testimony transcripts where judges noted his precision. I understood that what I needed was not cleverness. I'm clever enough. Victor always said so, not as a compliment. What I needed was credibility by association. An honest man's certainty is the most convincing document in the world. Better than a notarized affidavit. Better than an alibi with 20 witnesses. When Jack Mahoney says, "This man didn't do it," it means something. It has meant something for 40 years. I borrowed that. I borrowed 40 years of a good man's earned trust, and I spent it on myself. I'm not sure what to do with that. I don't think there's anything to do with it. He really did believe me. He really did. I'm almost sorry. The almost is honest. I'll leave it there.
Margaret was still at the estate when I came back. I don't know what I expected. The house felt differently now. Not the controlled grief of before, but something stiller. Something that had already decided what it was. She opened the door before I knocked. She'd been watching the window, I think. She looked at my face the way she'd looked at me in the garden, recording, careful, and then something in her shoulders released. Not relief. More like the particular exhaustion of a person who has been holding their breath and finally accepted that the air isn't coming. She said, "You know." It wasn't a question. I said I did. She said, "I tried to tell you." I said, "I know." And I meant it without qualification. She had tried. She had used every tool available to a woman who loved her brother and could not bring herself to destroy him directly, and she had tried. I had not heard her. I said, "What happens now?" She looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I felt the full weight of having asked a woman who had already done everything she could what should happen next. She said, "I don't know. I thought you'd have something left for that." She wasn't angry. That made it worse. She was just honest. And I was standing in her hallway with nothing left for her. I went to Vasquez the same afternoon. I laid it out clean and complete, the way I've laid out every case in 40 years. No editorializing, no hedging, just the facts in their sequence with the evidence supporting them. The UV results, Victor's handwriting, the dates, the amounts, the name at the top of every page. Vasquez listened without interrupting, which is what he does when something is serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Stills is already charged, Mahoney. The DA has a case. Judge has set the date." I said I knew. He said, "Daniel Remington left the state this morning, 7:15 train to New York." I hadn't known that. I sat with it. He said, "There's a lawyer's name on the New York end, man named Aldrich. He costs more than this building costs per year, and he's already been retained." I didn't speak. He said, "The evidence is 48 hours old and out of jurisdiction on a closed case with no formal charge to Remington." He wasn't saying it won't happen. He was saying what happens next is long and uncertain, and the outcome is not guaranteed, and the man is already gone. I sat in the chair across from my captain's desk and didn't speak for what felt like a very long time. I went to the holding cells. Pryor passed me in the corridor and gave me a look I didn't have the vocabulary to answer, and I kept walking. Stills was in the third cell. He was a big man going soft, mid-50s, with the kind of face that has been in difficult rooms a long time and stopped being surprised by them. He was sitting on the bunk reading a day-old newspaper. He looked up when I came to the bars. I told him I was the detective who'd built the case. He said he knew that. I told him I'd found information in the past 24 hours that cast significant doubt on the charges against him. I told him his lawyer needed to know there was a notebook with UV-revealed accounting evidence that pointed to a different primary suspect. I told him who that suspect was and where the notebook was and which pages to ask for. He stared at me for a while, then he said, "You're telling me this why?" I said, "Because someone should." He said, "That's supposed to help me?" I had no answer for that. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. It deserved a genuine answer, and I didn't have one. I stood at the bars for another moment, and then I left. I heard him go back to his newspaper as I walked away.
November 16th, 1949. This is the second morning since Victor died, and I haven't slept properly. I wake, and for a moment I don't remember, and then I do remember, and the weight of it comes all at once. Victor was my brother. He was difficult and correct and relentless in his correctness, and he was my brother. I can hold both things. I have held them for 35 years. We came up together in this house, in these rooms. I know every room's particular creak and the way the lake wind sounds different in December than it does in July, and Victor knew all the same things. We had a shared geography that nobody else will ever have access to now. I miss him. I know what I did. I know what I'm doing, and I miss him. I don't expect anyone to understand how both of those things can be true simultaneously, but they are. I loved my brother. I loved my mother more. I made a choice that I would make again if I stood in that room on that night with the same options available. I am not a monster. Monsters don't grieve. I miss Victor every day. I'll miss him the rest of my life. That is not a small thing. It does not undo anything. But it is true, and here in this diary, only truth.
I typed my supplemental report that evening at my desk in the precinct. I typed it accurately and completely, the way I type every report, because the only standard I've ever held to in this work is the standard of accuracy. What I found, when I found it, what it means, the full accounting of the notebook's contents, the UV analysis results, the timeline of the embezzlement as Victor had recorded it, Daniel's name, the lawyer's name, the New York forwarding address from the estate's housekeeper, who gave it to me with an expression that suggested she'd known something was wrong from the beginning and had been waiting for the right person to ask. I filed the report. I put it with the Remington case materials. The proper people would read it. The proper channels would do what proper channels do, which is uncertain and slow and not guaranteed. I poured a drink from the bottle in my desk drawer, rye, the bottom half of something I'd opened in October. I poured 2 fingers and set the glass on the desk and looked at it for a while. I thought about Eleanor at her sister's house in Evanston, and whether she'd want to know about this day and whether I could tell it in a way that didn't make me sound like a fool. I thought she probably would. I thought I probably couldn't. I left the drink where it sat. Margaret called 3 weeks later. She was ringing from a hotel lobby in California. I could hear the echo of it, the ambient distance. She said she was moving west. She had family in Pasadena on her mother's side, and she couldn't stay in Chicago. I said I understood. She said the estate had sold. She said Daniel had sent her a letter from New York. She didn't tell me what was in it, and I didn't ask. There was a long pause on the line where neither of us had anything efficient to say, and we both let it be long. Then she said, "Mr. Mahoney, it wasn't your fault." I said I knew. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I don't believe you." Just that, without cruelty. "I don't believe you, but I thought someone should say it. Someone should have said it to you before now, and I'm sorry they didn't." I said, "Margaret." She said, "Yes." I said, "You tried to tell me." She said, "Yes." I said, "I'm sorry I didn't hear you." She said, "I know." Then she said she had to go, and the line went quiet, and I held the receiver for longer than made sense before I put it back. I've closed a lot of cases. Some I'm proud of. Some I've made peace with. The ones where the law and justice weren't perfectly coextensive. The ones where what I found wasn't what I was looking for, but was the truth anyway. The Remington case I carried differently. Not because I was fooled, not because I was less than thorough. I was thorough. I was thorough enough to find it eventually after it mattered. He chose me for exactly that. Daniel Remington read 40 years of my work and made a calculation. This is the man, honest enough to believe me, good enough to fight for me, blind enough not to see me in time. He was right on all 3 counts. The notebook sits in my desk drawer. Victor's handwriting on those last 3 pages, dense and clear under the blue lamp, every number accounted for. I look at it some mornings. I remind myself what it cost. A case that isn't closed, a man in New York that costs more than justice, a woman on the wrong coast who tried every way she could to hand me the truth. And Stills. I think about Stills. The lawyers eventually work something out. Eventually is doing a great deal of work in that sentence. I pick up the phone because there's always another case, always another voice at the other end saying, "Mr. Mahoney, you're the only one. You're the only one who'll believe me. And God help me." 40 years. I always answer